of online platform. And there is much concern raised for the use of online platforms because it goes beyond just academic performance. Main focus as we move to face-to-face is on teachers and students' social, emotional skills and mental health. So special efforts will be made to engage our students so that we can help to build their social, emotional skills. Students need to be able to interact in a safe and stimulating environment to develop their social and cognitive skills. There are many students disadvantaged by the inconsistent internet services. Our schools serve as safe and secure spaces for teaching and learning. And for students, it is a gateway for social interaction and support. Moreover, face-to-face learning is needed to prepare students adequately for the CXC examinations, which will be held in from April 2022. So this approach that we're presenting and we're recommending is a multi-pronged intervention that is student-centered and seeks to ensure that learners continue to have equitable access to quality education. In our guidelines for the safe operation of schools, a number of areas is recommended and highlighted. And this document covers all schools in the Commonwealth of Dominica, including public and private schools and training institutions. As I said earlier, there are some risks that we have been considering when opening, and these include the spread of the virus among students in the classroom and common areas, the spread of the virus to large crowds in confined spaces, and that includes classrooms, school entrances and exit points, and during break time. We also consider the risk of the spread of the virus among workers in a room that is shared for a long period of time. And we also have to recognize the risk for our teachers and students with chronic medical conditions. In our guidelines, we identify what are the signs and symptoms of COVID so that persons will be aware of it. And our framework for reopening schools during the pandemic, we consider some core elements, and those include the safety measures in the environment, the precautionary measures that we have to take, the safety systems for the school. We have looked at health and nutrition. We are looking at transportation services. We are also looking at other support services for our staff and students. We must look at our human resources and vaccination and encouragement of vaccination and constant monitoring and follow-up. Those are the main core elements of the framework that we are offering. There are some guidelines which we refer to as general guidelines, but we have specific details for each of the areas. And I just want to highlight these. Persons who are unwell must stay home. All persons on the school compound are required to wear face masks in compliance with national policies. Schools are required to inform parents and students about the measures that are in place to allow for the safe operation and administration of the institution to accommodate classes and school-related activities. So next week is about sharing that kind of information to all our staff, all our students, all our parents. We have to prepare our schools and our students and to educate them on the importance of ensuring compliance with the protocols, why it is we have to do certain things, and what it is, what risks we want to reduce. So we are required to reinforce the need for strict compliance with the guidelines for the safe operation of schools. In order to protect the interests of staff and students, each school is required to take the appropriate actions against persons who are found to be in breach of any of the protocols while on the school compound. And we expect to class attendance and other statistical data must be collected daily and submitted to the Ministry of Education on a weekly basis to provide us with the necessary information, so where we have to make changes, we can make the necessary changes. Our guidelines include what steps are to be taken at school level prior to opening schools. What steps are to be taken upon reopening schools, especially as it relates to cleaning, sanitizing, social distancing or physical distancing, and the protocols as it relates to cleaning, how we clean, when we clean, what disinfectants to use, in what measures to use them, etc. We have to look at transportation of students to and from schools, and we are still continuing to work with our bus drivers. We have bus drivers that are contracted by the Ministry of Education, so we have to work with them. But we also expect that some students do use the public bus system, and we expect that these bus drivers as well would follow the guidelines as it relates to public bus system as coming from the Environmental Health Department. And the Environmental Health will certainly be working with us to ensure that bus drivers are compliant, because we want to reduce the risk of spreading infection among our school population. In our guidelines, we have specific guidelines for arrival at school and how we manage the entry and exit processes. We expect students to follow the protocol. We expect visitors to schools to follow the protocol. We expect parents as well to work with us as we seek to ensure we have protocols to manage the entry and exit of schools. So for that, we will have temperature checks to be done. Once we notice temperatures are above the limits, we may have to ask parents to come to collect those children so that they can do further investigation of them. Once we see any little risk that will put other students at risk, we will have to isolate those persons as well. Visitors, we want to encourage visitors to the school. Please make appointments, call in advance, and when you show up, follow the guidelines. Do not give our security officers, our hygiene wardens, our persons monitoring the entry and exit any difficulty, because the one aim is to reduce the risk and to make schools safe places. We also have safety measures during school, And again, following physical distancing, mask wearing, ventilation, and the like, reducing congestion. Those are the main things that we're looking at. Safety measures during school will also include how we dispose of garbage and washing hands and the other hygiene etiquette that is recommended. We have specific guidelines for unwell students, how to deal with them, and unwell staff and how to deal with them. And if there is an emergency, what are the steps that we follow to deal with them? And we highlight all the safety precautions and the hygiene precautions, respiratory etiquette, ventilation, and the other like. And we also will provide some support, as we said earlier, in terms of mental health and psychosocial support. So we have quite detailed guidelines and protocols. We will circulate to our schools. This we will make available on our Ministry of Education website and on the government website too as well, so that the public can be well aware of what is expected, what we plan to do, and how what are the processes we expect to follow, as we are not in normal times. So special precautions, special guidelines would have to be followed so that we can have safe learning spaces. I just give you a brief of some of the guidelines that we have in place for the safe reopening of schools. Thank you.
Well, thanks to Mrs. Harrison for her review of the document titled Guidelines for Safe Operations of Schools During the COVID-19 Pandemic. The Ministry of Education has also prepared an operation manual for blended education program. Both these documents have been circulated to schools. Copies will be made available to the public, but in the meantime, you can access these documents on education.gov.dm. Dr. Jeffrey Blaise is the Acting Chief Education Officer, and he will now speak on the blended education program. Please welcome Dr. Blaise.
Thank you, Mrs. Diane Duran Smith. Good morning, everyone. Permit me to recognize the presence of the Honorable Minister for Education, Honorable Alfred, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Mrs. Chandler Hyacinth, Ms. Isabella John, who is the Acting Senior Environmental Health Officer, the media gathered here this morning, and members of the listening and viewing public. Good morning and welcome to this press event. I will be relatively brief in my presentation. Diane has just indicated to me 5 minutes, probably be less than that. I need to highlight the difference between the two documents as referenced by PS. One document is, you would have noticed, it is kind of child friendly, so you would have seen a lot of graphics and stuff when you view the document, the guidelines for safe operation of schools, and that's really suggestive activities for enhancing safety within the organization. This is both internal and external documents, so it can be used across the board. So these are just ideas for enhancing safety. The other one, which speaks to the blended learning, is really, and it's called Operational Manual for Blended Learning, is one which really speaks to responsibilities of the various stakeholders within the system. It's more internal for internal operations of the school, so it speaks to the responsibilities of the principal, of the deputy principal, of the head of department, the teachers, the cleaners, responsibilities for the classroom teachers themselves, and students and so on, that sort of thing. And it speaks to how we operationalize the what Honorable Minister referred to earlier on, in terms of the schools that are supposed to fall under various categories and so on. So there are two different documents. One is really for safety, and the other one really is for responsibility of various stakeholders. So I really felt it was important to reference the differences in that regard. We have done a lot of work in terms of preparing for all eventualities, and you would have noticed that from the last year, and in terms of how we do things as an education system. And we always tell the public, trust the process, and the Honorable Minister alluded to that, because we are in the business of education, and we put structures in place to facilitate the safe operations of schools. I always emphasize in that particular order, it's safety first, then comfort, and then education. Education is the third one in terms of priorities for us, but safety and comfort very important for us as we do things. We look at things from different lenses, we must say, because we have all interests to satisfy. Because the parents' interest may be invariably different from that of the teachers in some cases, and from that of the policy makers, and probably from that of the general public. So you have competing interests, and the role of the education system is to look at all these competing interests from different lenses and put a structure together that will satisfy all of them. And we have to understand that, because sometimes you would have a structure that may not be the best fit for one particular interest. And they may say, well, we do that, but then the other persons, might, so we have to strike a fine balance. And in that, we have to be very flexible in our operations to ensure that we take into consideration all stakeholder feedback. And we did extensive, as was indicated earlier, engagement of stakeholders to obtain feedback. In terms of our plans, next week, as indicated, a lot of the, what Honorable Minister called orientation, looking at the psychosocial needs of our staff and our students. We have to touch base with our students. There are a number of students who might have had challenges that, because they were not in the face-to-face environment, they may not have been addressed adequately. So we will be looking at whatever challenges our students may have gone through. Some of them may have had COVID, or had siblings who have had COVID, had parents who may have died, and siblings who may have died. A number of things happen, and that's for staff as well. So we'll be providing an avenue so that persons can touch base with each other, talk, look after the human resource needs and the personal needs of each other, and so that's very important. Even before we settle on into the whole idea of schooling, we have to take note of that. Touch base with our stakeholders, very important. As well, we have been giving schools a number of supplies, hygiene supplies and so on. Again, PS alluded to that. We have always been, and we have redoubled our efforts to provide supplies for schools. Alcohol, sanitization equipment. We are going to very soon install a number of face basins in some strategic areas within our schools. We have to distribute masks to our students. We have thousands and thousands of face masks that we're going to be, going on a drive for distribution next week, and so on. So these are important bits and pieces that will put the whole structure in place in terms of the face-to-face environment. We are we're going to be very strict on monitoring and evaluation, and I'll speak to that in a minute if the chair gives me an extra 2 minutes, because that's important. So I want to mention that in a bit. But before I mention that, we are also very flexible. What we are suggesting is that there are guidelines in place for persons to ensure that we follow a protocol in terms of implementation of the plan. However, even within that, there's a level of flexibility that we have to employ. So for instance, you might find a peculiarity within a school context that we may have to deviate slightly from an established plan. They will communicate to us formally, we will consider their needs, and we will make amendments as needs be. That is important, because one size will not always fit all. Yes, so the level of flexibility has always been incorporated into our planning processes. Coming back to the monitoring and evaluation, we are going to be very, very rigid with our monitoring protocols. And we have 3 layers of monitoring and feedback. The first one, and we developed 3 documents in that light. So you would have found those documents in the appendices of one of the documents we have. I think that's the operational manual. We'll be pulling out those checklists and distributing them individually, because they are very important. The first one we dub compliance guidelines, and the compliance guidelines are really just a document giving principles as administrators within the school system, ideas on how to keep the school environment safe. So it will really basically tell the principal, okay, you need to do this, that, and that, and that is really just suggestions for them to keep the teaching learning environment safe. So in it, if I'm just to mention one of the areas under our compliance areas, they would look at what should you do in terms of hand hygiene, in terms of respiratory hygiene, in terms of physical distancing, in terms of implementation. So it gives them guidance. So for instance, one of the areas would tell principals, okay, in order to enhance physical distancing, when students are queuing, you might need to put little stickers on the ground, that sort of thing on the floor, depending on where they are. So ideas, that's one. The second document is what we call a self-assessment checklist for schools. And that really is a principal taking that document and saying, okay, I'm going to check to see if I am following the protocols as outlined in the guidelines document. And there are a number of areas of compliance, again, that principals are expected to adhere to the school system, not just principals, stakeholders generally speaking. And they would be using this internal checklist to do a self-assessment of the environment to make sure that they comply. And the third document will be what we call an external checklist that will be used by external supervision and support staff, as well as persons from our environmental health department, the team of persons who will be going out to the schools to ensure that schools comply with the protocol. So that's important. And then, as PS indicated, record keeping, reporting is very important to us. So we expect schools to be keeping accurate records and providing relevant data for us on a weekly basis, so that this can inform policy decisions moving forward and so on. So these are very, very, very important to the Ministry of Education. I really want to express a note of appreciation on behalf of the Ministry of Education to our stakeholders, starting with our parents, who give us really frank and honest ideas and opinions during our stakeholder engagements. We had several stakeholder engagements online, and as PS indicated, reached thousands of persons. Our principals in the schools, who have been very, very collaborative, working with the Ministry of Education to implement structures, and our support staff of the Ministry of Education, supervision and support staff, who assisted rigorously with the planning processes, and very importantly, to our teachers and our students. Our students who have been online doing what they do, and we have been monitoring them because we monitor a lot online, and they have been doing an excellent job, the students. But even more so our teachers. Our teachers have been doing a very, very fine job online with delivery of learning, and the parents can attest to that. Many parents, you'll meet them on the road and they'll say they're very satisfied with what has been happening in the online environment with our students. Notwithstanding the fact that we have some difficulties in terms of internet bandwidth and so on in some areas, because those things they're always there. But generally speaking, in terms of planning, delivery, and execution, our teachers really did an excellent job, and we are asking them to continue doing an excellent job in the blended environment, both face-to-face and online. So I really want to thank everybody for the effort so far. We thrive on stakeholder feedback, on collaborative engagement, and that's how we do things, and we really want to call on the public to continue supporting the work of the Ministry of Education. And I will say in closing, trust the process. It works. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bless, for what you refer to as the bits and pieces, which really speak to the strength of the structure that the Ministry of Education has put in place for the reopening of school. We thank our panelists, and at this time, I invite the members of the media who are here to pose questions to our panelists, seek clarification on behalf of the public. There are some concerns, questions circulating in the public. If you feel they've not been addressed yet this morning, this is your opportunity to ask.
Thank you. Jaya Pending, DBS Radio. My first question is, how are teachers responding to the blended approach? Will they receive support? Are they receptive of the idea?
Dr. Bland?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. And sorry we did not address some of it in the presentation. But we have done extensive training of our teachers over the past years, really, I must say. Since prior to COVID, we had been engaging teachers in blended learning, virtual engagement of students. And we redoubled our efforts during the COVID period. Our teachers are trained on a continuous basis. We, as a ministry, that's what we thrive on, professional growth and development. And we use teachers to teach teachers, put it that way. We have a cascading model training of trainers. We have some 73 lead teachers, what we call lead teachers in our primary and secondary schools. And those lead teachers have been trained, they have undergone extensive training, and they are taking the lead at their schools to train the staff at their schools, as well as the staff within school clusters and national training as well. So they are very much ready for that. Certainly we need to beef up in terms of our technological advances, because you know that it can be very expensive having virtual learning capabilities and so on, especially if you're doing a full hybrid approach. But with the blended approach, it's okay, because what we're really doing is having students in face-to-face and online at certain times, and our teachers are very much ready for that. I must also say that our teachers are happy for the face-to-face engagement, because as they themselves as stakeholders have been asking us, well, because one must know that the online learning is a very, very difficult task, both for teachers, for students, and for parents. It takes a lot of planning, teacher planning, because when you are in a face-to-face environment, you can use a number of physical teaching aids to do that. In a virtual space, you have to create the virtual apps. You have to use apps to create and software to create virtual learning aids for students. And it can be very difficult, yes, when they have to download videos and do all sorts of stuff. All night teachers are up planning. So they are welcoming the blended approach, I must say. Certainly, thank you.
Just go to the program, okay. Some citizens have expressed concern with the timing of the resumption of face-to-face learning. Some persons are saying that some schools may not have had time to prepare. Others are asking, why are we resuming school right after we have had a few carnival festivities? Could you respond to those concerns?
Yeah, definitely. When we plan as a ministry, we look at all factors. Yes, we look at all stakeholder feedback, and this planning process is not just a snapshot plan. It's a continuous plan. It has been in the works for some time. Yes, so the timing is the timing, but the timing, it has nothing to do with the immediacy of the timing as it is based on what you alluded to. So, for instance, our meetings with stakeholders started since in August, yes? And all during that time, we were putting structures in place in terms of planning. Even after Independence time, we looked at the environment, and, we had other meetings, other stakeholder engagement meetings, because the timing wasn't right yet. During January, we met our PTA executives just about 3-4 weeks ago. All PTA executives within the country, primary and secondary PTA, 2 members of the PTA for all schools, and we discussed further some of those challenges. So the timing is just coincidence, yes, but it has been a prolonged process of planning, and we are confident that our school system is ready for opening, and that is what it is. Yes.
What does that mean for grade 6 national assessment?
Yeah, good question. Grade 6 national assessment is an internal assessment, a local assessment, yes? It's not external like CXC. This means that we have control over a number of factors, yes? Definitely, we have control over the time of the assessment, the date, so the ministry could take a decision based on the approval of cabinet when we want to do the exam, yes? We can take a decision on the structure of the exam, how we tailor it, based on the needs, based on students' exposure to learning and the needs. So what we are doing now, we still have a couple months to go. We are strategizing as to what impact there would be, if any, and we'll take a decision on that as time goes by. But definitely that's not something to be too concerned about, because these are internal assessment modalities, and the ministry has a structure for ensuring. Similarly, after Maria, persons were concerned, and the children did very well in the exam. And I must say, the online students have been learning. They have been doing their work online, so definitely I don't see a significant problem in terms of the grade 6 national assessment.
And for early childhood, you mentioned early childhood and the daycares, you will contact them one-on-one. But are there any, concrete plans in place, for example, like the guidelines, that's what we're using?
Special section.
Special section for early childhood?
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay, all right. So how soon might we see early childhood centers opening?
As the Honorable Minister said earlier on, we have quite a bit of centers within our primary schools, and those with the students will be open. For the other centers, we have to understand that many of these are private entities, and they're rented accommodation, and obviously inspections have to be done to ensure that the accommodation meets because some of those are not fit for purpose in terms of schooling, so inspections have to be done to make sure that they meet the compliance needs, and therefore decisions have to be made in that regard. So that will be dealt with in time. Certainly, exactly. But in terms of our guidelines, provisions have been made both for early childhood as well as special educational needs and the like. Yes. Thank you.
We thank Jaya from DBS News for her questions. And of course, Dr. Blaise, thank you so much for your responses. At this point, I would like to call this press activity to a close. We thank you so much for coming. If you want to access the documents spoken about, education.gov.dm, that's the Ministry of Education's website. They are already online, and they will be distributed via social media, via WhatsApp, and the like. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for coming, and have a good Friday and a good weekend.